Okay, we're live. Hi, my name is Shunotra, and I'm joined by my colleague Malvika. And today we're going to be talking about the law on corruption, law on anti-corruption in India. Now, before we get into talking about what the law is, there's an interesting fact that you should know of. Now, there's an organization called Transparency International that releases a list every year called the Corruption Perception Index. Now, this index ranks different countries on the basis of how much corruption is in their country, and or basically how corruption is perceived to be in that country. The last list that came out in 2019, India was ranked at 80, and that's not a very good number. In fact, we dropped two places from the year before, and basically only signifying that this problem is getting much worse year on year. Most of us have even normalized corruption in our daily lives. Like if it could range from the instance of say bribing a traffic cop to get away with running a red light, or even as big as say bribing a local authority to get some of your work done. All of it, by the way, is very illegal, and be it giving a bribe or taking a bribe. And we'll go over some of the key points on what the law says, and basically what you need to know of if you want to file case of corruption or want to tackle corruption in general. Now, to start defining what corruption is, it is the abuse of power by people in power for their own gain in a dishonest or an unethical way. In India, it is illegal for public servants to accept money or gifts over and above anything that the salary that they get, or any allowances that they get, in return for doing anything that is either different from their duty, or not doing their duty, or in fact even favoring a person, or doing a favor for a person. People who even help public servants commit crimes can also be punished under this law. Now, since the anti-corruption law in India, that's the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988, deals with corruption in the public sector, you should know who a public servant is under the law. You are a public servant if you are working with the government, if your salary is paid by the government, and if the work that you do is public duty. You can also be considered a public servant if you are working for or being paid by a local authority like a municipality or a panchayat. Also, if you are employed in an educational institution or a cultural institute, which may get money from either the central or the state government or a local authority. Now, you are also a public servant if you are if you are a member of a cooperative society engaged either in agriculture, industry, trade, banking, and you're receiving money from the government, or you're receiving money from a company created by laws passed by the government, or a company that's controlled or owned by the government, aided by the government, or any company basically where the government is a major shareholder. Then there are some other instances of where the law defines who a public servant is. Then you're also a public servant if you are employed or are being paid by a company established under a central or a state law. Say, for example, a person working for life insurance company, the corporation LIC, they would be a public servant. You could also be a public servant if you're working for a company which is aided, owned, or controlled by the government, or a company where the government again is a majority shareholder, as I had explained earlier. Now, Malvika will take you over certain crimes that public servants are basically certain crimes recognized under the Prevention of Corruption Act that public servants are can be prosecuted under.
So, as Shunotra mentioned, accepting a bribe itself is the key to corruption. So, public servants in India are not allowed to accept money, gifts, other than the salary that's actually part of their job. Now, they cannot ask for money or gifts or ask for any addition to their salary to do their job or to not do their job. Even this would be considered to be corruption. Being partial to someone who has paid the money or giving them gifts or doing any special favors for someone who has offered them money or gifts are all crimes, and such public servants, as Shunotra had mentioned, can be sent to jail for a period of 3 to 7 years, or they may be asked to pay a fine. for any of these activities that I just mentioned. Now, a public servant breaks the law not just by accepting money, they can even accept something of value. And by gift, I don't traditionally mean an object, it can either be in the form of land, service, benefit, anything. So, if you are accepting something of value and not exactly money, you can also be sent to jail for a period of 6 months to 5 years and also pay a fine. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that you are a public servant who's working in the public works department, and you are in charge of improving for approving the tender for a road construction. So basically, imagine if you accept a car from one of the tenders, so that one of the people who have supplied a tender, so that you basically do them a favor. Now, this is a precarious situation and this is corruption. So, let me give you another example. Let's say that you are influencing someone to do a job. For example, if a district magistrate influences the chief engineer of um, a particular road project to do a favor for one of his friends that's in the construction business, then even if this happened, or let's say that this didn't really take place, the district magistrate, who is a public servant under the law, would definitely get in trouble for corruption. Even if one of those government officials, let's say that you go to your Aadhaar center and one of your government officials is charging you a lot of money to get an Aadhaar card in exchange for doing it faster or for doing some special service for you. All these are acts of corruption, and the public servant can definitely get in trouble for this. Now, Shanotra will mention some other instances of corruption.
So, in other instances, when a public servant steals or gets someone to steal any property that is given to them as a part of their official work, this would be classified. This stealing of property would be classified as criminal misconduct that's given under IPC, and the punishment for this crime would be basically the public servant would be jailed anywhere between 4 and 10 years, and would also have to give a fine. Now, you, as Malvika explained, you know that giving and taking bribes is a crime in India. You should also know that helping a public servant commit a crime is also illegal. You are breaking the law if you help, suggest, or encourage a public servant to commit a crime of accepting bribes in the form of, say, money or gifts, as Malvika explained, in addition to their salary and benefits that they get. Now, it doesn't matter if the crime was successfully committed or not. You can still be sent to jail for a period of about 3 to 7 years for helping such a person commit a crime. And you will also be liable to pay a fine along with the imprisonment. To basically give you an idea of how the situation would work, say, for instance, Malvika is applying for a job at the railways, and I go ahead and give, say, some money to the person who is managing recruitment for the railways. Now, though Malvika did not technically give the money, I went ahead and I helped him to basically go ahead and just influence Malvika to influence the officer to hire Malvika. Even if she wasn't hired, it would still be considered as an illegal act under the law. Now, Malvika will take you over some of the bodies that handle cases of corruption in India.
So, two of the main bodies that I'm going to talk about are the Central Vigilance Commission and the Controller and Auditor General of India. So, you have the Central Vigilance Commission. I'm going to refer to it as CVC. It was set up in February 1964 on the recommendations of Santanam Committee on the prevention of corruption to advise and guide the central government agencies on the issue of vigilance. Now, on 25th August 1998, it received statutory status in the form of an ordinance by the president. But one of the major things you need to remember about the CVC is it is only an investigating agency and does not have any power to formulate or make any laws or policy. So, Section 8 of the CVC Act is very clear. It lays down the powers and functions of the CVC. Some of these powers and functions include basically supervision over the Delhi Special Police Establishment for examination of offences which are committed under the Prevention of Corruption Act, as Shrunotra had mentioned. Then inquiry or investigation or recommendations to the central government regarding any form of corruption, bribery, accepting gifts, etc. Reviews of the investigation are done. And the CVC basically has the same powers as a civil court to actually summon and enforce attendance, receive evidence. So they can call witnesses, they can cross question. They have a lot of powers like this. But Section 12 of the Act very clearly clarifies that proceedings before the commission are deemed to be judicial proceedings. So you can definitely file appeals if after you go to this commission. Now, you have the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, which I'm going to refer to as CAG. The CAG is a constitutional authority. It is created under Article 148 of the Constitution of India. Now, the role of the CAG is basically has assumed a lot of importance over the past few years because of the rise in corruption. So the Delhi High Court and Supreme Court, through many cases, have held that even private companies are liable to CAG audits in certain circumstances. So basically what the CAG does is, under the Section 10 of the CAG Act, it is responsible for computing accounts, keeping accounts in relation to union, states, and these accounts are later tabled in front of the president or the governor of the state. Now, Section 18 also empowers the CAG to make necessary inquiries in connection to the audits. This may include inspection of premises, inspection of book of accounts, questioning witnesses, and they can do this in respect to any expenditure incurred by a private company, for example, or any form of transactions, manufacturing related issues, profit and loss accounts, balance sheet. So there'll be this unit basically will come and inquire into all these aspects to see if there's any form of corruption and to make sure that all the accounts are transparent. Now, CAG also has the power to audit grants or loans, which are also given to certain authorities or bodies. So this entity is very important because it has assumed the role of I would say a corruption vigilance body. So because most of the transactions that happen between the authorities and the bodies that happen are always audited by the CAG, and then only is it actually up and running. Now, keeping in mind the two authorities, I'll also talk about a few concepts which are important. One is regarding the procurement bill in relation to corruption. In the wake of the Supreme Court order cancelling the 2G spectrum licenses, which happened quite a few years ago, and the subsequent challenge that happened to the allocation of coal blocks, the government of India introduced the Public Procurement Bill 2011 in the parliament. However, the bill had lapsed, but what it actually did was it laid down responsibilities of the procuring entities for ensuring that there was transparency and that the whole process was efficient, fair, and that equitable treatment was given to all the bidders. This was also important in terms of promoting competition and also important in terms of fixing prices. Another important aspect in relation to corruption that we should all know about is regarding blacklisting. Now, blacklisting is basically when the government can choose whether or not a certain entity, which can be a person or a member of the public, is allowed to contract with the government. So if they say that a certain company is blacklisted, it means that the government is willingly choosing not to engage in any contracts with them. So issue of blacklisting was challenged many times before the Supreme Court and many high courts. But the Supreme Court has upheld the practice of blacklisting right now, but again with certain conditions. And they did this so that the rights of the suppliers are not deprived, then the livelihoods are upheld. Now, another important thing and this is something that all of us can check out ourselves, is a central public procurement portal. There is this portal known as a central public procurement portal, which consists of a national as well as a mission mode portal. The mission mode portals are basically the state portals that are there for each state. So the Department of Expenditure in the Government of India has set up this portal to act as a single access point for information related to procurements made by various government ministries and departments. So if you actually want to see how these procurements and tenders work, then you can go to this portal and see. Now, one of the main objectives of this is to make sure that all the transactions that happen between government public servants are transparent, and it is mandatory for all ministries and departments of central as well as state governments to ensure that all the tender inquiries are put up in one place. So this is a very cool thing that you can check out. You can see what all ministries have, what all procurements with entities and bodies. Now, Shanotra will discuss a very important aspect on whistleblowers with respect to corruption.
So this is one final thing that we want to cover is basically what are the protections available for people reporting cases of corruption. So one thing that usually deters people from like filing such complaints is the repercussions that you may face. You don't know whether the person you are complaining against is like, you know he's a government employee, but you don't know how well he's connected, or you have no idea of what might happen if you go ahead and file this complaint. You worry that, like, maybe that you've heard of cases where RTI activists have gone ahead and filed, like, basically file RTIs and to get out information to report corruption. And you've heard of many attacks and assaults happening on them. So, of course, like, worries you whether you want to go ahead and file such a complaint in the first place or not. So, for these specific instances, there's a law in place called the Whistleblowers Protection Act. This law came into place in 2014. And what it does is basically it establishes a mechanism to receive complaints relating to corruption by public servants. It also sets processes for conducting inquiries and prevents any victimization of the complainant. This does not mean that you can go ahead and make anonymous complaints under this whistleblowers mechanism that is set up. Instead, what the authorities under this act do is that they receive your complaint and they keep it confidential. And it's basically by law, these authorities are not supposed to reveal your information to anyone. They must conceal your identity at all costs. Now, there's a small chance that these authorities may have to give your information to the head of the department of the person you filed a complaint against. But this will also only happen after they've taken your express written permission. Now, this law, as I said, the Whistleblowers Act, provides detailed instructions for filing complaints, conducting inquiries, and the measures that can be taken by authorities under this law to safeguard a complainant. If you have any specific questions on this law, you can leave a comment under this video, or you can go onto our website and leave a question on Ask Nyaya. Be it this law or any other question that you may have on anti-corruption, we'll get back to you soon. We hope you had an informative session. See you next Thursday.